when you look at the situation and you wonder how he said what he said, why he said what he said in the situation that he said what he said in, and yet he still hasn't been fired for it. Maybe there's no smoke without fire. Morning guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. I'm Sean Butler. Bugs in Line is just up in front. Hope you're all happy, healthy, doing the things that you love. Please do me a favour, smash the like, smash the subscribe, drop a comment, hit the notification bell. This is what, 174 of Tottenham walks. I was going to do a video yesterday, guys, to talk about Conte's comments, but in the end I went live because I thought it would be quite complex. Because I do think it's a complex conversation around what his words are, who's he aiming them at, and ultimately who is responsible for the things that he was right in acknowledging, that we do have a weak mental aptitude as a club. So I went live, put the link up in the comments to get some company on Sunday, on Mother's Day, thinking that I'd probably struggle to find anyone. And there was about 20 people that came on over the 2 hours. You know, everyone had different opinions, different takes on who's responsible. Was Conte right to say it? Was he wrong to say it? Does he need to go because he said it? And then by the end, it turned into a Daniel Levy debate, as it always does. It was good fun. It was really good debate, enjoyable, and nice to get everyone's different takes in a fairly respectful manner. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It was a good one for sure. And look, guys, we are going to talk a little bit about Conte's comments in a moment. But before we do, transfer news today. It's quite an interesting one. You'd have heard the name before 1,000 times over the last 4 or 5 years, such as the frequency in which we're linked with this guy. And that's Min-Jae. All over the aggregators this morning. I believe the original source of it was The Independent, but I could be wrong on that. And they're saying that Tottenham have joined the race with Manchester United to sign Min-Jae from Napoli in the summer. He has a release clause of £43 million, but that is only able to be activated in the summer. And that Tottenham probably are the favourites of the two clubs to get him, because Manchester United's backline is fairly settled with Martinez and Varane. And would Min-Jae really want to go and be a squad rotation player when he's kind of hitting the heights of his career that he's hitting? And bearing in mind, guys, he's only 26, and Tottenham have been linked with him for the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. All the way back from when he was in China, I believe. So then when he came across to Turkey. And I think I think Napoli only paid either 4 million quid for him or 10 million quid, I forget. One or the other. But in any event, what a player he has become. Super fast, like deceptively quick. Positional play is brilliant. He's good in the air. He's very strong. A physical specimen of a player. Plus he's two-footed, so he can play. You know, his natural position would be in the middle of a back three. But he's competent and can play on the left or the right of a back four when Napoli ask him to. And just a very, very, very talented player that immediately would improve us and solve a massive problem. Huge problem for Tottenham. And at 43 million quid, you know, there's so much value for money there. That's not even a lot of money for an average player anymore. And he's not an average player. He's a brilliant player. So I'm sure Napoli are doing everything they can to tie him down to a longer term contract that removes the release clause. But as of yet, nothing has happened. I'm sure he's very happy at Napoli. Happily, we'll call it. Because, you know, they're going to win the league and they probably make it to the Champions League final. And they're playing the best football in Europe for me. A brilliant, brilliant team that is managed very well and that is doing everything right. So why would he leave? Well, look, at the end of the day, money talks, and as much as Napoli are going to make a lot of money this year for, you know, going deep in the Champions League, and maybe winning, or probably definitely winning the Serie A, you know, nearly all of the Italian clubs are wildly losing money. I think there's only 2 clubs in Italy that turned a profit last year, and that's Fiorentina and Atalanta. The rest are all losing vast sums. And so, you know, can Napoli really afford to pay him a salary that is commensurate with what he could get from Tottenham or from, you know, a Premier League club? I'd argue no. And so maybe that would be an incentive for him to, you know, to come to the Premier League. On top of that, of course, he would be joining Heung-min Son, his teammate and compatriot, and apparently they're very close friends. So that wouldn't be a bad carrot, I guess, to use. And of course, from Daniel Levy's perspective, whilst his eyes would be watering about the fact that he'd have to pay, you know, 5 or 10 times what he could have paid for him in the summer, and the fact that he'd be stinging a little bit and sore and salty because Jose Mourinho said he wanted him, and Steve Hitchen and Levy got together and bought him Joe Rodon instead. Massive L's for Steve Hitchen and Daniel Levy on that one. But, you know, when they look at value for money, I think you find it just in the player for the release fee anyway. But when you think about how much money Daniel Levy can make out of the shirt sales for Heung-min Son and for Kim Min-Jae from Korean fans, that kind of cements Tottenham as a Korean staple for the fans over there. There's 80 million Koreans as well, don't forget. So that surely the salary and the transfer fee would pay for itself in commercial merchandise within the first contract. But on top of that, it would help with the attraction of more Korean tourists to the stadium. You know, I was in the premium enclosure in the East Stand with the padded seats for the Nottingham Forest game. My brother kindly paid up for myself and for my dad for his 70th birthday to go. And we got to experience all of the kind of silver service dining and that whole, you know, razzmatazz of being behind the stadium or inside the stadium in the luxury, I guess, in the pre-game, the half-time and the aftermath, free drinks and, you know, the free food. And it was a brilliant experience. Didn't really feel like you were at a Tottenham game. It felt more like you were in the business class or the first class lounge in an airport. But look, I understand now. I have a new kind of viewpoint, a new vision into that argument that Daniel Levy is trying to not just gentrify Tottenham, but almost gentrify the fan base. And, you know, by doing that, he gets less pressure from the hardcore in the stadium and gets more money from the, you know, from the day travellers. And I get it. I don't know how I feel about it, but I experienced it. And in that experience, in that particular section, for every 100 people you saw, 70 of them weren't English. The majority was probably Americans or Canadians, like North Americans. And then the second highest sort of demographic was probably Koreans, right? And so, you know, Kim Min-Jae coming in helps to keep that gravy train, that cash cow of Korean tourism and Korean interest very much at the peak of the commercial activities. And from Daniel Levy's perspective, it makes a lot of sense. So, you know, from a footballing perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And from a commercial perspective, it makes a lot of sense as well. So I'd love to see Kim Min-Jae come in. And I hope that Napoli don't manage to get a new contract signed for him between now and June. And if he doesn't, it would be amazing if Daniel Levy for once could just recognise the value in paying the fee quickly, getting it done. And then look, you can then look, it doesn't really matter then whether you have Conte or Tuchel or Amorim who would play maybe a back three, or whether you have a Pochettino or an Enrique or whoever who plays a back four, because they will all use Kim Min-Jae alongside Romero, and it makes you infinitely stronger. Infinitely stronger. And then obviously you still need to replace Clement Longley. If you could then go and get Bastoni as well. I mean, imagine a back three next year of Romero, Kim Min-Jae and Bastoni, and that could be done for 100 million quid. 100 million quid, that half of which will be paid for by finishing top four. Finishing top 5 or 6 or 7, suddenly you're struggling to make that work, right? But if you do have that back three, and then you've got Destiny Udogie on the left, and you've got Porro on the right, and Bentancur comes back from injury, and everything suddenly looks a lot more rosy at Tottenham. It's that unfortunate issue that we never seem to resolve, which is our defensive frailties, which makes everything look poxy at times and volatile and devoid of any reassurance at the back. That's not to say that I blame our defence for all of our problems this year, because we got kicked out of 4 games that affected 3 different trophies without scoring a goal, and on that basis you have to also lay a lot of the blame at the midfield and the attackers as well, because it's a team effort, and the team also extends to the coach. And this is where I'm going to take very quickly, because I did get most of my thoughts about Conte's comments off my chest yesterday, but I want to just make it clear to anyone that's interested. For me personally, I think he was right in everything that he said, but I also think that if you're going to start casting aspersions on everything that's wrong with the club this season, then if you're not making anything clear that you've made any errors as well, apart from saying, yes, the coach is responsible, then I don't think you're being fair and reasonable. And I also think that you can't say those things in public in front of the media and expect a positive reaction from players that you have just called out for their mental aptitude. It might be different if you call them out for the specifics of a game. Oh, this mistake, he shouldn't have done this, or sloppiness there. But to say that there's a general cowardly mentality at Tottenham Hotspur, I think you're going to lose the dressing room. And on that basis, I think that whilst he was right to say what he said behind closed doors or in a different environment, I don't think you can say that and expect any other outcome than negatives. I don't think that Tottenham are going to rally for him. You might see one game, if they still feel sore about it, against Everton, that when they come back after the international break, you might see one game where they put their middle fingers up and say, we'll show you about a mental attitude deficiency. But after that, they will down tools. And according to the Guardian's report last night, Tottenham players are basically saying that the majority of them are happy to see the back of him, and that they come to the conclusion that he's either going or he's gone anyway. And that's such a shame for him to have said what he said now. And I reiterate about the difference between finishing 4th and 5th is 50-60 million in a transfer budget. That pays for Min-Jae. Or if you're going to bought Min-Jae anyway, that pays for Bastoni or most of Bastoni. So finishing top 4 is so important. And him saying what he said is never going to help us in that regard, ever. Unless he leaves and you get a late manager bounce. But more importantly, guys, I don't think he says that. Of course, in fact, I know he doesn't say that if Tottenham win the game 3-2. Especially if you win the game 3-1. If you win the game 3-2, he still doesn't say it, because why would you come out slating the players after a 3-point victory? And ultimately, the reason why we didn't win the game 3-2 was because of a terrible VAR decision. A terrible one that has slipped by the wayside because of all the furore around what Conte said and and who's to blame. Is it the chairman? Who was he even aiming at? Was it the board? Was it the players? And all that stuff. Another VAR decision has cost Tottenham. Another disgusting decision. Yes, you can make the argument that Pape Sarr shouldn't put himself in a position like that anyway, but ultimately there was no foul committed. The referee is there to judiciate the game and be effective in his job. Mistakes can happen, but there's a reason why there's a team of 7 people looking at the monitors to see whether or not a mistake was made. And if there was, you have 2 options. You either refer it to the referee to go and look at the monitor and make his own mind up whether or not there was a foul there, or you just overrule it. And they did neither. And ultimately, his reaction, his outburst, came after a 3-3 draw with Southampton that shouldn't have happened anyway. We should have won the game 3-2. And putting aside whether or not Tottenham, crumbled, we still didn't lose the game. And I find the timing of it a little bit odd. And I'm going to speculate here. Call me crazy. Tell me this is where I want your opinion, especially. Call me crazy here. But because that doesn't happen, if that bad decision doesn't take place, and yet we don't even lose the game, and yet he goes off on one like that. A lot of people are suggesting he was begging to be sacked. Now, if that's the case, and if you agree with me that regardless of whether he was right in what he said or not, you can't say it, and therefore he needs to be sacked, he needs to go, and yet he hasn't been sacked, And I know there's also the argument that he apparently went and spoke to the board and said, I wasn't calling you out, I was calling the players out. But in either event, whether he was or wasn't calling the board out, I don't think that, I still believe that you can't say that and expect positive outcomes from the players. So if he hasn't been sacked, why? Daniel Levy has sacked Pochettino 4 months into a 5-year contract. He sacked Nuno 2 months into a 3-year contract. And he sacked Mourinho, 1 year into a 4 month, or 18 months into a 4-year contract. So he's used to paying out massive sums on compensation, and yet Conte allegedly only has 2 months left on his contract. So if you do sack him, you've got to pay what, 2 million quid? Or maybe, just maybe, there's truth to the rumour that that contract extension option, the 1 year, that maybe there is a clause in his contract that if he is fired within the initial 18 months, that option is immediately triggered, and then that has to be paid out on as well, which would mean that if you did fire Conte for speaking out like he did on Saturday night, that you don't have to pay just the £2 million compensation, which is essentially nothing anyway. If he's not doing it, is it because Conte would have to get paid 17, 18 million quid? And if that's the case, is that the real catalyst to why Conte said what he said in an otherwise weird environment to have said it? I don't know. And he calls the players selfish. Maybe he's being selfish. Maybe there's truth to the rumour that he's financially in a bad spot because of getting scammed. And maybe that money that he was supposed to get paid back by whoever scammed him didn't actually get paid back. And maybe he's looking for an easy way out, and I'll take Tottenham for another 18 million quid on the way out. I'm not saying that's the truth. I'm just saying that when you look at the situation and you wonder how he said what he said, why he said what he said in the situation that he said what he said in, and yet he still hasn't been fired for it, maybe there's no smoke without fire, and maybe those rumours about the contract extension option is true, and maybe he was doing it for an ulterior motive. And if that's the case, then I've got absolutely no patience or tolerance for that. If it's not, if it's more innocent and he's just a winner and he absolutely just couldn't hold it in any longer and he wants to go after the players because he thinks that they are ultimately responsible for, us not competing this year, then fair enough. But I'd still stand by the idea that, you know what, if you're going to start pointing fingers, to quote Mia, who said this on my show yesterday, when you point one finger at someone, four are pointing back at you. It's a great quote and I loved it. And ultimately, I think that Conte's got a lot to answer for this season as well. And you know how I feel about that. His stubbornness, his lack of adaptability, his lack of tactical ingenuity, his fluidity, his loyalty to players that don't deserve it this season, his lack of curiosity about players that we haven't used. There's a bunch of reasons that fall squarely at his feet as to where we could have done better. And we won't know whether we would have done because he never took the opportunity to show us. So, me personally, I am Conte out. I don't disagree with what he said about other situations at Tottenham, but I think that he didn't say what he could have and should have said about himself. So it's not an entirely honest appreciation of the situation. And I think maybe, just maybe, there's an ulterior motive for doing what he did in that particular circumstance. Either way, Kim Min-Jae for me, guys, is a winner chicken dinner. Let's get it done. Please let me know your thoughts on the conversation, though. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you later on. As always, bye-bye.